Stephen, President Trump, during the election campaign, referred to undocumented Mexicans as rapists, drug dealers, criminals, gang members. Yet we've seen a number of research reports from some very prestigious institutions telling us that immigrants, both legal and undocumented in the United States, commit far fewer crimes than Native Americans. So, I mean, was the president just stirring it up here?
Well, we've had a long back and forth about what Donald Trump said as a candidate, and I think that statement has been parsed to death. But there's just no question that to almost all American voters, when something is put to them as a crime has been committed, and it's been committed by someone who did not come into our country the right way, or came on a visa and overstayed, or otherwise went around the regulations that are enforced on Americans in every other country in the world, they feel like it's in a different category. It's the kind of thing, regardless of its scale, should never happen, and yet it does. And so they don't feel very satisfied with kind of dismissing it as, well, more people do these bad things in other categories. And that's the context where I think there's been a lot of frustration among voters in the border states, but not limited to the border states, that not enough has been done to really deal with those who are committing these crimes, violent or not, when they didn't come into the country the right way.
Laura, I want to get to something else very quickly, and that is the wall. There's a senior fellow, a researcher, analyst at the Brookings Institution that says wages and prices in the United States will go up if that wall is built. It will affect the U.S. economy. It will affect what people pay for in terms of services and goods here. Are U.S. companies going to have a lot of difficulty finding workers to replace those Mexicans and others who are going to be expelled?
Yes, they're high cost to the United States economy in many of these measures, and the wall is just one of them. It was mentioned that there's over $500 billion, almost $600 billion a year in trade that goes across the border. It's the most integrated border in the world, according to the United Nations. And anything that even slows down that legal trade is going to end up being a business cost for people on both sides, and for U.S. importers in particular. That's going to be passed on to consumers, and pretty soon you're going to have people very upset about that because they've become accustomed to the cheaper consumer goods that globalization and the type of integration that Mexico and the United States have developed provide for consumers themselves. There's studies that show also that if the 11 million people in the United States as unauthorized immigrants were deported, it would create a crisis that was many times worse than the economic crisis of 2008, and would come to about $2.6 trillion over a period of 10 years. And this is because these people are producers, they're consumers, they pay taxes and pay into the economy. In many cases, we're seeing people coming back here to Mexico now who don't even remember Mexico, who don't speak a word of Spanish. They're people whose lives are developed as part of communities, as part of the economy on the other side of the border. So you just have to think that somebody is not thinking this through in terms of these policies, because even the short and medium, let alone the long-term consequences of carrying them out are extremely detrimental to the United States itself.
Eric, talking about not thinking this through, let's look at the broader economic or trade relationship between the United States and Mexico. Mexico is currently the third biggest trading partner of the United States. Two-way trade was valued in 2015 at $531 billion. We have President Trump, who's threatened to radically renegotiate NAFTA or tear it up completely. All that would be in jeopardy, wouldn't it?
A lot of it certainly would be. We don't really know the ultimate outcome because we don't know what specific proposals might actually be pursued. I mean, there's a lot of conjecture at this point. But having said that, the basic point, I think, stands. The relationship between the United States and Mexico, and for that matter, the United States and Canada, at this point in history is so fully integrated that, for example, an automobile, probably the best example, before you get to a finished product, before you get to a car that you can actually drive, that automobile will cross the border in various stages of assembly 6, 7, even 8 times. So every time it has to cross the border, if it's more complicated to do so, there's an added cost there. And so the just-in-time delivery begins to be in question. The costs go up, the labor costs arise, and at some point, the producers, the folks who are creating jobs are going to say, well, wait a minute, I might have a factory in Arizona or Texas, but it's so complicated to get stuff across the border that, frankly, I'm going to move my production to a third country, particularly in Asia, because then we don't have to worry. We just have to cross the border once to get into the United States. We don't have to cross it multiple times. We have become fully integrated. 40%, in other words, 40 cents of every dollar that Mexico produces is represented by content produced in the United States. That matters because as jobs are created in Mexico, it means jobs are also created at the same, in the same way in the United States. And so to say that we're going to make this relationship economically more complicated, more difficult, is really to say that we are going to intentionally lower the U.S. competitiveness in the global economy. And I think that's probably something that most voters would, if it was put to them in that context, I don't think they would support.
Stephen, what do you make of the point that this has not really been thought through very well? We're hearing a lot of rhetoric, and a lot of it appears to be rhetoric that's a spillover from the election campaign. You know, as Eric pointed out, a lot of jobs on both sides of the border depend on trade between these two countries. 6 million jobs in the United States depend on trade with Mexico. And if we just take a commodity like corn, Mexico is the biggest importer of U.S. corn after Canada. What happens if Mexico goes shopping for corn somewhere else?
Well, I think that we're in a period where the administration has only a few appointed officials in place. In most agencies, they don't even have a nominee below the secretary in place. We do have spillover of rhetoric from volatile election campaign. We have an equal amount of conjecture, extrapolation, and I think some degree of hyperbole trying to assess what worst case scenarios things could go, and a president who somewhat provocatively has said that almost every negotiation is reopened for reconsideration. So we're doing that with China, with Europe, with Mexico, everywhere. So it opens a lot of versions of Pandora's box and has people feeling uncertain. But with the appointments that he's making and with the outreach that Vice President Pence, the cabinet secretaries are having, I think we're getting things more in line of sussing out where are the real contours of negotiations open. Saying we're going to renegotiate NAFTA is a provocative thing to say, but then we need to wait and see what exactly is being proposed. What bandwidth within the treaty are we looking at? Or are you looking at something to supersede it, which would be very complicated? So I think we're still in the hangover of politics, exploration of where the policy goes, and I think it's kind of wrong to jump too far either way and assuming that all of the things from the campaign are done to the nth degree, or that none of them will be done.
Right, Eric?
Yeah, I think a lot of those are actually fair points because we don't know the direction or the specific proposals. But one thing I would say is in this era, in this moment of uncertainty, people are making decisions in Mexico in particular. And what we're seeing in Mexico right now is a government that is actively trying to diversify its economy, recognizing that it's too dependent on the United States. And therefore, if the United States willingly tries to reduce that relationship, that Mexico is really going to be out of luck unless it develops alternatives.
Yeah, but while we wait, Eric, you know, investors and business people, they like certainty. They like to know what's happening.
Absolutely right.
This does not help that.
It doesn't help it at all. And what you're seeing is some investments delayed as well, and therefore increased production delayed. But, you know, to my way of thinking, it doesn't help the United States as an economy if Mexico is looking to Brazil and Argentina, for example, as they're doing right now, as possible alternative suppliers of corn and grains that would be coming from the American Midwest. They're also developing closer links with China, which is not a traditional trade partner with Mexico, because, again, they're trying to diversify. They don't know what's coming. There is uncertainty, but they're trying to protect themselves going forward.
Right. Laura, some of this is being put onto, as we heard, to the fact that this is a new administration. There are hundreds of positions not yet filled, thousands, in fact, and the fact that as this administration, you know, beds down, calms down, finds its feet, that we'll see a bit more realism injected into its policies, especially those policies that we see towards Mexico as well. Do you believe that to be the case, that things will improve?
No, I don't like to be pessimistic, but it's important, especially from the Mexico position, with so much at stake, to be realistic. And if we look down the line at some of those promises that were made regarding Mexico during the campaign, they're being carried out. Kelly may say that they're not mass deportations, but they have put into place the machinery for mass deportations, including hiring thousands of extra border agents and the broader criteria. And they have also gone forward with the construction of the wall and many of the other points. So I think that we have reason to believe that it could be this extreme. When we look at trade, for example, we can say that we don't know what they're going to demand for a renegotiation, but actually Peter Navarro and Wilbur Ross, who are the two people who are heading this effort, have been very clear about it. They have talked about putting into effect so-called safeguards that would kind of freeze the treaty if there was a significant deficit, and some very radical things, and many of them come from protectionist backgrounds. So one of the biggest impacts, for example, in talking about the investor uncertainty, is they continue to talk about a 20% border tax or a 35% tariff. And investors have said very clearly, even ones who are already here, if they do that, it will price our goods out of the U.S. market, and we'll have to leave. It's a chilling effect on investment. It's already affecting the Mexican economy. We can see it in the peso value that's gone steadily down, and in significant drops when Trump makes a particular comment that this is real and this is happening. And Mexico's diversification is coming way too late, but it's the direction that Mexico has to move in. And many grassroots organizations are saying, maybe there's a real opportunity here. We should have done this long ago. The dependency of the United States was never healthy, and now it's our time to get out of it.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for being with us.